Portions of this program are brought to you by Apple Computer, makers of the new Apple IIc, a technological breakthrough of incredible proportions. And by Ford Motor Company. You're going to love the quality. At Ford, quality is job one.
This evening in a televised address, President Reagan told the nation that his policies in Central America must be continued. If not, he said, the United States faces a threat that is at our doorstep. But right now, there are people who have already crossed the threshold of our country. Hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans have come seeking a safe haven in the United States. Are they political refugees, or are they illegal aliens? Well, joining me now from Harlingen, Texas, KGBT-TV, is Ms. Stacy Merkt. She's an American who has been brought to trial for aiding an illegal alien. Ms. Merkt, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Your trial in Brownsville, Texas ended today. Could you tell me why you were arrested?
I was arrested and charged with conspiring to transport and transporting two, quote, illegal aliens. The trial hasn't ended today. Still, the jury is deciding whether or not I'm innocent or guilty. Supposedly tomorrow they'll finish up and we'll come back and hear their deliberations and what they've come up with.
Tell me exactly how this developed.
Like how I was charged, or?
Yes, well, how you were charged, why you were charged.
Okay. I was charged because I was picked up on a road, number 649 in southern Texas here on February 17th, which was a Friday. We were picked up about 4:30 in the morning and subsequently charged with these three things: transporting and conspiracy to transport. The events of the day are pretty clear in my mind, yet I went along on a trip specifically to be a translator between three Salvadorians and the newspaper man who was with us. Two Salvadorians who are able to talk, one who is not, one who is a daughter and all. But I went along specifically to do the translating on that trip. The first thing I remember is that it was real dark, and all of a sudden there were bright lights that came towards us and whooshed right past. And then the next thing I know, I didn't see this happen, but I hear that the next thing I know, the car had turned around, and then there's a flood of lights right in the back of us there. I turned around to see who it was, and my first thought was that it was the police, and I wondered if we were going too fast. So I asked Sister Diane, who was in the car, if indeed we'd been going too fast. The next thing that happened was that red lights were flashing and we were pulled over, and it was subsequently the INS officials who asked us to identify ourselves and if we were indeed United States citizens.
And did they prosecute the case against you?
Yes. They
Immigration and naturalization?
They did. It was the United States attorney who's doing the prosecuting, but certainly they're doing, the immigration folks are the ones that are choosing to do.
Were you the only one that was prosecuted?
Yes, I am the only one that's being prosecuted. Sister Diane asked for a pretrial diversion, and I don't know as of yet whether that's been granted or not. But and the newspaper man, who is Jack Fisher, has not been indicted to this day.
How long were you involved in this kind of thing?
I came down specifically to southern Texas to learn more about refugees and to experience more about refugees here in this area. I came to work at Casa Oscar Romero, which is a shelter for Central American refugees. I've spent the last 5 years of my life working in Colorado Springs, sheltering the homeless and working with people there who don't have things. And I came down here to learn more about those folks who ended up not having those things here, specifically the Central American refugees.
Did you realize at the time that you were doing anything that you could be arrested for?
I don't believe that anything I'm doing is illegal, so I would have to say no, but I didn't believe that I would be arrested, no.
Tell me what's happening in the south part of Texas as far as the sanctuary movement is concerned. What is the sanctuary movement?
The sanctuary movement itself encompasses over 100 churches of various denominations that have taken a public stance to say that They are going to offer sanctuary, offer refuge to folks from Central America. They're going to give them a place, a forum from which to speak in exchange for protection. And there's certainly the hope that this will help encourage Reagan's policies to change regarding Central America.
What kind of services does the sanctuary offer to refugees?
Well, maybe I'd specifically talk about Casa Oscar Romero rather than the general sanctuary movement, since we're in southern Texas right now. Casa Oscar Romero offers the services of food and shelter and a little bit of counseling, and certainly just listening to people's stories so that we get a better idea of who they are and what their needs might be. A lot of the folks coming through right now have family and friends further on up, so a lot of what we end up doing too is being able to facilitate them receiving money so that they can get to where their family members are.
How many people, do you have any idea, have been helped through the sanctuary movement and now are out on their own?
Within the sanctuary movement nationally, I don't think I could give a number to that. I don't really know that statistic. I do know that over 1,000 persons have come through Casa Oscar Romero since it's been open, which has been for the last like 2 years or so.
Now, going back to the fact that you said you still don't think you did anything illegal, when I asked you, did you have any reason to be surprised when you were arrested, you said that, I mean, had you known it was illegal, would you have still participated in your desire to help other people?
I think there are two things we're dealing with there. Certainly number one is my belief in God's laws that I am called to shelter the homeless, to feed the hungry, and to welcome the stranger. Certainly there is that. The second thing that I'm dealing with there and that we're dealing with is the fact that I believe the laws of the United States offer political asylum to persons here. Specifically in the 1980 Refugee Act, these folks are allowed the right to be here to apply for political asylum status. So I think we're talking about two levels here. Number one, a government level, which I believe I'm not guilty of anything there, and number two, God's level, which I know I'm not guilty of disobeying his laws.
Did you plead not guilty?
I pled innocent. Yep.
And now, is this the first time that the United States government has used legal action against sanctuaries?
To my knowledge, it is. I know that there have been other persons arrested in regards to transporting refugees, but to my knowledge, this is the furthest that they've gone, specifically with these three charges, with the conspiracy charge and the transporting charge.
And what kind of precedent do you think this sets as far as the sanctuary movement is concerned with the government?
I would hope a couple precedents. One is that I would hope it would assure refugees who are in this southern district of Texas that when they go into the Harlingen office to apply for political asylum status, that they won't be arrested, thrown into jail, where their possible deportation proceedings could happen before their subsequent hearings could happen. Yes, I would hope that that would be one thing that would come out of this. And I think the second thing that I would hope for is that other church people would be encouraged to take stands to feed the hungry and to shelter the homeless and to welcome the stranger.
But what if the precedent that it really sets is in the minds of the people who are involved in the sanctuary movement, and therefore out of fear of being arrested or out of fear of breaking the law, that these kinds of actions stop?
I know that won't be so. I went to Tucson a couple weeks ago for a Freedom Seder where 142 persons, church persons, signed a statement saying that they were legally, because of the laws, the 1980 Refugee Act, they were legally transporting Salvadoran refugees to this Freedom Seder, to this Freedom Supper. The church is supportive. The church is strong, and the church is coming out stronger. People who have been sitting in the courtroom these past days, people are coming out of the woodwork. I doubt that they'll be scared by this.
Would you do it again?
Surprised. Certainly I would, because of the two premises, that I'm not breaking God's law and I'm not breaking the United States law either.
Ms. Merkt, we have to take a commercial message now. We'll do that, and when we return, we'll be talking to a Salvadoran woman who has come to America seeking refuge right after these words. Stay with us. Also from Harlingen, Texas, is Ms. Brenda Sanchez Galan. She's a Salvadoran seeking refuge in this country. With her is Mr. Jack Elder. He's the director of Casa Oscar Romero, a refuge center for Central Americans, and Mr. Elder will be her interpreter. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ms. Galan, could you tell us what prompted you to leave El Salvador?
¿Qué fue el motivo por tu salida?
Bueno, pues más que todo, el motivo por el cual yo salí de El Salvador es para buscar un refugio para mi familia.
Above all, the reason I left El Salvador was to look for a refuge or place of safety for my family.
Pues ya que en El Salvador, por las circunstancias que se están dando, pues nuestro país está en guerra.
Actually, in El Salvador, we have a state of war, and for those circumstances, I was unable to stay.
Now, you said you wanted to protect your family, and there's a state of war and you couldn't stay. Was there any specific incident, single incident, that made you decide to leave?
Has dicho que hay un estado de guerra, que quieres proteger tu familia, pero no ha habido una cosa específica que te motivó para salir, algo específico que pasó ahí.
Sí, más que todo, pues nosotros, los que estamos pues involucrados en este caso de inmigración con la señorita Stacy, pues llegamos aquí a los Estados Unidos por la razón de que nosotros en El Salvador trabajábamos con las iglesias de El Salvador.
Those of us involved in this case, along with Stacy, arrived here in the United States precisely because in El Salvador we were involved with church work with refugees.
Pero en nuestro país existe, pues, no se puede decir una ley, sino que hay ciertas personas que están viendo, o sea, queriendo destruir el trabajo que realizan las iglesias en El Salvador.
In my country of El Salvador, a certain group exists whose aim it is to destroy or undermine the projects of those of us who are working with the refugees and church-related projects.
And you specifically felt that your life was in danger and therefore you had to leave?
¿Y tú personalmente te sentías algún peligro de tu vida?
Bueno, se puede decir de que sí, porque soy una pues de las personas que he trabajado mucho con las iglesias, con ayuda para refugiados que salen de las zonas de conflicto.
I would say yes, because I was one of those persons who was involved in a church-related project working with refugees who were leaving the war zones.
How did you leave El Salvador?
¿Cómo saliste de tu país?
Pues no sé hasta qué punto pues...
Pues siempre protegiendo los contactos, pero ¿en qué forma? ¿En autobús,
bueno, pues,
en avión?
Sí salí por avión, pero la cuestión es de que siempre ayudada por las mismas iglesias, siempre protegida por las iglesias.
As I left El Salvador by plane, but at each step of the way I was protected by people related to the church.
And who left with you?
¿Alguien se vino contigo?
Sí, veníamos, no solamente yo, sino que veníamos un grupo de trabajadores con la iglesia, o sea, colaboradores que trabajamos a tiempo completo y voluntariamente con los programas de ayuda social.
I didn't come alone. I came with a group of co-workers who were working in the same church-related project with refugees.
And what of your family?
¿Y de tu familia?
De mi familia solamente salimos mi hija, el papá de ella y yo.
Okay, of my family, the father of my child, myself, and my child were the three who left.
And you left other family behind?
¿Y has dejado algunos familiares allá atrás?
Sí, ha quedado, pues la mayor parte de mi familia pues ha quedado allá y hasta la fecha yo temo por ellos.
Yes, the majority or the greater number of my family members have remained behind, and that causes me some concern.
You evidently were concerned enough, though, for the safety of your family to take the chances that you did to escape El Salvador and to really, I guess, be brought into this country without going through proper channels. So someone had to sneak you into this country, and you were taking risks along the way. Tell me about that.
Dice que fue importante para ti salir por los motivos que nos ha contado, pero por todo el camino hubo riesgos. ¿Qué clase de riesgos y cómo fue el viaje?
Pues el viaje sí es bastante arriesgado, pero siempre y cuando uno se arriesga a todo peligro, siempre y cuando sea para salvar la vida de uno y la vida de su familia.
Well, it's true that the trip is full of risks. It's a treacherous trip, but when one is fleeing to save one's own family, then one meets the challenges.
¿Puedo continuar?
Sí.
Pues dado el caso pues de que nosotros trabajábamos con las iglesias allá en El Salvador,
given the fact that we work with the churches in El Salvador,
pues capturaron de nuestra iglesia,
they captured from our church,
capturaron a nuestro pastor, al doctor que prestaba ayuda médica a estas personas refugiadas.
in these projects of refugee aid, both our pastor in our church and a doctor who was offering aid to the refugees were both captured by the government.
Ellos fueron capturados a principios del año pasado
They were captured at the beginning of last year.
y fueron cruelmente golpeados y torturados
They were cruelly tortured and beaten
por las autoridades de nuestro gobierno.
by government authorities.
Luego después, a finales del año pasado,
At the end of last year,
pues también de la misma iglesia, también capturaron al contador de la iglesia y a la secretaria de nuestro pastor.
out of the same group of church people helping refugees, the accountant for the group was captured as well as the secretary to the pastor.
Pues esto nos motivó más a salir,
This was one of the immediate motivating factors of our departure.
pues sabíamos que los próximos éramos nosotros.
We calculated that the next people to be captured would be ourselves.
Fue por esa razón de que nosotros, ayudados con las iglesias, pues salimos de El Salvador.
For this reason, and helped by the churches, we were able to leave El Salvador.
So the churches helped you. Was there an underground network that you had heard of for the escape that the churches arranged?
¿Qué clase de red o qué clase de gente te ayudaba de la iglesia? ¿Era en forma legal o clandestina o...?
Bueno, pues en El Salvador se puede decir de que todo se hace clandestinamente, por la razón de que si se hace una cosa abiertamente, pues no lo dejan que uno termine.
You might say that in El Salvador everything's done in a clandestine fashion or secretly, because if one was to help the refugees, for example, very openly, then most likely your project would not be allowed to finish.
So you were aware of the underground network and perhaps involved in it.
Entonces, ¿te diste cuenta del red subterránea, como se dice, que prestaba ayuda a algunos que salían?
Sí, me di cuenta y por esa razón nosotros decidimos pedir esta ayuda y llegar hasta México, donde también pues pedimos ayuda siempre a las mismas iglesias.
Yes, I became of the network of help that was available. For that reason, we utilized it to get to Mexico City, and there also we were helped, again, by the same church people.
Did you ever consider going anyplace other than the United States?
¿Pensaste alguna vez ir a otro país, además de los Estados Unidos?
Bueno, sí pensaba quedarme en México, pero yo consulté eso a los miembros de esta iglesia de aquí de México y ellos me dijeron de que en México no me podría quedar porque no había un asilo o una ayuda para refugiados de El Salvador.
I thought initially I would stay in Mexico, but in consulting with the matter with the same church people in Mexico City, I was told that there wouldn't be any safeguards or any asylum available for me in Mexico.
Pero sí me dijeron de que al llegar aquí a los Estados Unidos podría llegar a legalizarme pidiendo un asilo político.
But I was told that here in the United States that getting to this country that I could undergo a process of legalization through the political asylum process.
And how were you able to get to this country? What were the actual physical movements that you had to make, and how did you have to make them?
¿Cómo fue posible tu llegada aquí a los Estados Unidos? En forma física, ¿cómo te moviste? ¿Cómo se movieron para llegar aquí al sur de Texas?
Bueno, más que todo, pues fui siempre ayudada, llegué a la capital de México y luego pues estas mismas iglesias me ayudaron a llegar hasta la frontera y luego pues me dijeron de que de allí de la frontera para acá tenía que ver cómo hacía yo para poder pasar. Luego, estando aquí al otro lado, pues iban a algunas iglesias me podrían ayudar.
That helped by the same church groups that helped me get to Mexico City, I was able to make it to the border area between Texas and Mexico. There I was just told to get across the border, and that once I was on the American side that there would be some church groups willing to help me.
Y bueno, luego pues llegué aquí a los Estados Unidos y pedí ayuda a la primera iglesia que yo encontré, y pues ellas me dijeron de que sí, que me podrían llevar a un lugar donde sí me iban a atender como un refugiado.
The first church I came to, I was told that yes, they would take me to a place here in the valley where I would be taken care of as a refugee.
Pues tengo que darle gracias a Dios por la razón de que llegué hasta este lugar, hasta esta casa que presta ayuda a refugiados centroamericanos, y hasta la fecha pues son personas que para ellos no importa distinción de razas, ni color, ni nada, para poder brindar esta ayuda.
At times I must give thanks to God for the help that I received at that house, the help that's given to all Central Americans without any distinction as to their race or as to their beliefs, and it is continuing to assist Central American refugees.
What will happen if you're deported?
¿Qué te pasaría si te deportara?
Bueno, en el caso de deportación, pues sería franca al decir de que si yo regreso a El Salvador, peligra mi vida, la vida de mi niña y la vida de mis demás familias que están en El Salvador.
If I would return to El Salvador, not only my own life, but the life of my child, the life of the rest of my family members would also be in danger.
Pues he conocido muchos casos de salvadoreños que han llegado deportados luego después de pedir un asilo político aquí en los Estados Unidos.
But I've known many cases personally of people who have asked for political asylum in this country, have had it refused, and have been deported to El Salvador.
Y lo mucho que duran en nuestro país son una semana o 2 semanas. A los días ellos aparecen muertos junto con toda su familia.
In the cases of these individuals, that if they last 1 week or if they survive 2 weeks, it's a lot because we find them dead along with the rest of their family members.
And you knew this before you came to the United States?
Y de eso te habías dado cuenta antes de venir para acá, de qué pasa a los que están deportados.
Sí, me había dado cuenta, pero para mí, mi fe me hace creer de que Dios está por delante de todo eso.
Yes, I was aware of it, but my faith is such that it tells me that God is leading me and God will somehow provide some protection.
I'd like to thank you very much, Ms. Golan, for being with us this evening, and also Mr. Elder for translating.
Muchas gracias por tu participación.
We will return in just a few moments after these commercial messages, and we'll be talking with the defense attorney in this case. We'll also be talking with an expert on immigration. We hope that you'll stay with us and join us on the phones. Are these people illegal aliens, or should they be given refuge? We'll be right back. Joining me now from Harlingen, Texas is Mr. Dan Sheehan. He's an attorney representing Ms. Stacy Merkt. And with me here in New York is Mr. Roger Connor. He's the executive director of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Mr. Connor, you've been able to hear Ms. Merkt and you've been able to hear Ms. Golan. Give me your reaction from what you've heard so far in the program.
I think that that this whole debate is going on 2 different levels, Sandy. There is a group of people who want to challenge the Reagan administration's policies in Central America, and that's one level at which the debate's going on. This trial, the smuggling of individuals into the United States, is obviously a terrific way to dramatize their opposition to the Reagan administration's policies in Central America. But if you get off, and I'm not an expert on Central America and what the policies ought to be, I'm knowledgeable about immigration. If you get to the level of immigration, I think that what's been said here is really not focused on the real problem, and that the sanctuary movement is the wrong solution because they focused on the wrong problem. You see, I think there's general agreement that many of the people who have left El Salvador to come to the United States, left to come here and work illegally, left and came here to work illegally. And I think there's general agreement on that. There's also agreement that there are some people who are fleeing from political persecution in El Salvador to come to the United States and who have a right under our laws for political asylum. Now the problem is how we have a process that allows political asylum to true political refugees without encouraging even greater illegal immigration into the American job market from El Salvador than we've already got. So it seems to me that the real solution to the problem being talked about of people living in El Salvador, living in areas that are displaced by fighting, where they're fearful of even just being caught between two fighting armies, the obvious solution is to provide safe refugee camps in the surrounding areas so they don't have to have enough money for an airplane flight to fly out of there, which most people in that war-torn country cannot afford an airplane flight. Don't have church people to pay their way and bring them up to the United States. You see, the great majority of displaced persons, or potential displaced persons in El Salvador, can't be helped by this movement that's being described here. The only way to help them and the way to help those who are truly in fear for their lives is to involve the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, the Organization of American States, to provide safe, secure refugee camps outside the area of fighting so that when people are fearful of their lives, they can go there, and then when the fighting ceases, they can go back home, as opposed to coming to the United States.
If he agrees
That's
with
the
that.
solution.
Mr. Sheehan, is that the solution? I'm sorry, I cannot hear you, Mr. Sheehan.
But can you hear me now?
Now I can, yes.
The gentleman may consider himself an expert on the technicalities of immigration law, but he knows virtually nothing about what's going on in El Salvador. Now, to suggest that the people who are coming here to the United States from El Salvador are coming here to seek jobs that's preposterous. The fact of the matter is that, as he must know, the United Nations High Commission on Refugees in March of 1981 officially declared all the people in El Salvador to be prima facie refugees, which means that it's more probable than not that they're refugees fleeing from personal persecution. Now, the fact of the matter is that what we have discovered here in the Harlingen district in Texas is that Mr. Hal Bolden, whom I've personally interrogated on the stand, he will not even accept applications from Salvadorians applying for refugee status in this country, if in fact he finds that they have come into this country without a visa or illegally. The fact is that the Refugee Act of 1980 expressly demands and mandates, as a matter of law passed by Congress, that the Federal Executive Department set up a procedure pursuant to which the Immigration and Naturalization Directors will in fact accept applications regardless of the status of whether the people are legal or not legally entered into this country. Now, I mean, I just assume that the gentleman has been obtained here to be on the show, but he doesn't know what he's talking about, frankly. And I'm amazed that he'd say stuff like that.
Mr. Connor?
Well, I don't know the district director in Harlingen. I agree with your guest that our law is that if a person does have a right to seek political asylum in the United States. But I don't think he really responded to what I said, because what I said was the way to really provide help to anyone in El Salvador, whether a peasant who has no ability other than to walk, or someone who can get the money together to fly, if you really want to help anyone in that country who's fearful of their lives and who's displaced by war and is fearful of returning back home, it would be to provide supervised safe haven in the surrounding area. And I've debated this subject before. I've debated it with some of the leaders of the sanctuary movement.
So you're saying that sanctuaries should be set up in El Salvador?
Not in El Salvador, but in the surrounding country.
In the surrounding country.
In the surrounding countryside, so that anyone who can walk can get there.
All right, Mr. Sheehan, could you respond directly to that?
Yeah, like Honduras, where we've got 20,000 American troops. Obviously, you know that the solution, talking about down there, is to stop sending military equipment and hardware through Reagan into that country. It doesn't solve anything to be setting up these little camps. You know perfectly well that the people are being terrorized by their own government. 51,000 people, citizens, non-combatants, have been massacred by their government down there. This is preposterous to suggest that somehow you're going to be able to protect these people by bringing them off in camps. Who's going to provide the protection for these people? The government down there? Or would you suggest that it's our military people down there? That's preposterous. I don't think you know what you're talking about.
Mr. Connor?
This gentleman wants to argue Reagan's Central American policy.
No. I want to talk about you're saying that these people can be protected. That you're saying these people can be protected by putting them in camps.
All right, Mr. Sheehan,
you obviously didn't listen
first.
to me. Well, that's okay. I mean, your game is to argue with Reagan, and I don't have any dispute. You argue Reagan, what he's doing is wrong, 51,000 people killed by the government, so on, all you want. What I'm saying is, if you want to help the people there as opposed to opposing Reagan, if you want to help the people there, then what you will be doing is becoming an advocate for secure refugee camps outside El Salvador, outside the zone of the fighting. It's very interesting to me that the guest said the reason she didn't stay in Mexico was not because she, by her account, not because she wanted to come to the United States, but because there was no assistance available to her in a refugee camp in Mexico. Now, why is it that some of the moral energy that is coming out of this movement isn't being directed at the Mexican government to bring pressure to bear on the Mexican government to provide that kind of safe haven so she wouldn't need to make that dangerous trip through Mexico to the United States?
I'll tell you why. Because the United States Executive Department and the person, Mr. Reagan and his administration, is putting massive pressure on the government in Mexico, threatening them and threatening cutoff of any assistance and everything to force them to drive those people out of their country. And I would assume that you would know that.
But if he's forcing them to drive them out of their country, then he's forcing them into this country. Because that's where they're sending them.
What he's trying to do is he's trying to force them out of this country and force them out of Mexico to make them stay there. Because he's maintaining that, in fact, to allow those people to flee is giving evidence to people all across the world of the barbarous nature of the government that they're supporting down there. Well, everybody knows that.
I mean, he keeps saying everybody knows things. It's unfortunate that there's not someone from the State Department, for example, here to defend themselves. We have been doing our best as an organization. And I think if the sanctuary movement and the moral energy that is contained within it were being focused on the government of Mexico, because this is the first public statement that I've heard along this line. I mean, it seems to me that if Mexico is in fact responding to the Reagan administration pressures, that they should be called on that, and that that the moral energy that it's being developed here should be focused at the Mexican government, should be focused through international channels, should be focused in the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, because that's the way to solve the problem for the great mass of potentially displaced persons. And notice, if we were doing that, as opposed to trying to provide highly publicized sanctuary for a few, which is this movement is not helping the 500,000 El Salvadorans that are in this country illegally. It's a few hundred or a couple of thousand. It's drama. It makes good media. And if you want to oppose Reagan's policy in Central America, it's a terrific tool. But if you want to help people, if you're concerned about those displaced by the fighting, most of them can't afford the bus trip, let alone a plane trip out of El Salvador. And so you will be bringing pressure through international channels on the government of Mexico and other surrounding governments, and the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, to provide safe haven nearby. Because there's a very interesting thing. If there was safe haven nearby, for one thing, as soon as the fighting died down, the people would easily be able to return home. Not so easy when you're in Harlingen or Chicago. Second of all, if anyone is deported from the United States, just one more thing. If someone's deported from the United States, the government here decides that they are not, in fact, a political refugee, and they are deported. By having safe haven in the nearby countries, if that person, in fact, believes that the government is wrong, that their life is in danger, there'd be a safe place for them to go to. Now, it wouldn't be the great improvement in the potential for jobs and so on that coming to the United States is, but it'd be safe. So the people whose only motive is to flee for their safety would have a place to go. Those whose real motive is securing job in the United States, they wouldn't want to go to such a refugee camp. So you see how that solution tends to protect those who are in danger without encouraging people to violate our laws. Now, it seems to me that's what we ought to be aiming at.
Let's get the reaction from Mr. Sheehan.
May I respond?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I don't know where you get this fantasy about these people coming to our country seeking all of our jobs around here, other than the fact that it seems to be politically palatable for you to say that, and not to talk about what's causing the people to flee down there, really, that everybody knows. The Catholic Church knows that, the United Nations knows that, Amnesty International knows that. I mean, I don't know exactly where your interest comes from in advocating some fantasy that we set up just secure camps down there. Who do you plan to have guard those camps down there? Do you want to send in United Nations troops? Do you want to send in American troops? Do you want to send in Mexican troops? Who's going to guard those camps from their government?
You don't listen to me. I didn't.
Yes, I do.
I said outside El Salvador.
Where?
Outside in southern Mexico, for example.
In southern Mexico?
You see that there's one little fact that you're ignoring in all this.
Well, what's
and
that
that
one
is
little fact?
That the great majority of El Salvadorans who are in the United States illegally came here before the fighting ever started. And yet you're sitting there trying to tell a national television audience that the only reason that people are leaving El Salvador is because of the bad government that's there.
Well, when did the fighting start, according to you?
The recent fighting that the recent government that you're opposed to.
I want your great expertise on this, since they've been killing people and slaughtering people since 1976 down there. Or didn't you know that, since you don't know what's going on in El Salvador?
Well,
didn't you know that?
We can We can,
No, I'm
you know, you can
fact
go
question.
back and forth all day. There's been illegal
No.
immigration into the United States from El Salvador for the last 20 years.
Oh, so that you're talking about a 20-year problem? I think all the American audience knows that the problem that's being talked about is the influx of people since about 1976 in the last handful of years. And that's
not
fighting
the
and
only
slaughter.
problem I'm talking. No, I don't agree with that. That's not a correct statement.
So if you're saying it's a problem since before 1976
Yes.
for 20 years?
Yes, absolutely.
Well then, 20 years ago, it might have been okay to set up some kind of haven for the people down there. The fact of the matter is now that since 1976, the right wing under Dubuisson and Ordin and all of the others that have been verified uniformly by all of the investigating teams that have been sent down there, except by Mr. Reagan and Mr. Kissinger, have verified that the people are being systematically exterminated down there. You cannot set up safe havens for them. The United States
Not in
government
El Salvador,
has put up such pressure on them.
you certainly can set up safe haven for them in southern Mexico with the support of the Mexican government.
My comment? That the fact of the matter is, the United Nations High Commission now, whom we have spoken with, and you may not have spoken with in Mexico, says that they have been interviewing Salvadorian refugees who have been coming into Mexico, and that they find that well over 55% of all of those people qualify under the United Nations definition of refugees as fleeing for fear of persecution.
So why then isn't the Mexican government providing them refuge?
The Mexican government
and
is
why aren't
giving
you
only
pressuring the Mexican government as much as the U.S. government?
Because I live in America. I live in the United States. I vote in the United States. I am responsible for what the United States government is doing down there. I'm not a Mexican. I don't vote in Mexico. It's clear that you go down and they'll say, deal with your own government. Deal with them. This is where I, as a voter, have an effect.
But with the sanctuary movement,
pardon?
With the sanctuary movement, it is a movement that can concentrate its efforts wherever it chooses.
The sanctuary movement is made up of American citizens who can focus on our government policy. It's the old story, Sandy. If a doctor sits in an office and people keep coming into his office with broken legs, he can either treat the broken legs or he can go out and try to find out that there's a major pothole in the street in front of his house and they're all falling in and getting a broken leg. The fact of the matter is that just tonight, President Reagan came on and told the American people that we need massive, excuse me, I can't even believe it, military expenditures to go down and crush the citizenry down there who oppose those people in power. Now, that's no solution. I thought we learned that in Vietnam. I thought we had learned that type of thing. But the fact is that they're functioning on this fantasy of ignoring what's the source of the problem down there.
Unfortunately, he wants to argue Central American policy. That's fine. Reagan spoke tonight and so on.
And we really should stick to immigration.
But if we want to talk about immigration,
yes,
it's got to be put in context, because we cannot have a policy for El Salvador that we're not also going to apply to South Korea, to Taiwan, to the Philippines, to Mexico, to Haiti, to the entire Caribbean, and so on. You see, unfortunately, the world in which we live is one with 4.5 billion people. There are going to be 6 billion people by the year 2000. In Latin America alone, the labor force is going to grow by 80 million people in the next 17 years. So the United States cannot, it is not a solution to offer to say that everyone who is in a country that this gentleman feels is a bad government, is a repressive government, is a right wing or a left wing.
And killed by their people, by their government.
One moment, Mr. Sheehan.
That in every country in the world where this is going on, that the solution is for everyone who can get out to come to the United States. That's not a solution.
All right, we have to stop right here and take a commercial message, but it gets down to the argument of, are we a country that has our arms open to everyone for refuge as the country was started? Or the other question, though, Mr. Sheehan, that I have to pose to you, how much can this country hold? So there are two very important points going on here, opposite points of view. We'll continue this conversation as soon as we return, and we'll be getting to your phone calls as well.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Connor that we have focused attention in the wrong place on this issue, that we're talking about what's happening in El Salvador rather than what's happening on our borders in relation to the immigration laws of our country. And Mr. Sheehan seems to reinforce this.
I have to ask you to get to your question. Can you get to
my comment is directed toward the young woman who has been charged with meeting an illegal alien to come into the country.
Yes.
I understand her compassion, and I understand why she did what she did, and I hope she doesn't have to serve 15 years in prison or even 15 minutes. But that's not because I believe she's not guilty. I believe that she has exercised compassion without wisdom, which is something that was done also at the Mariel boat lift with the people coming from Cuba. That was a disaster. And,
all right, I'm running out of time, and I want to allow Ms. Merkt a chance to respond to your comment. Ms. Merkt?
My first response was, or is, to think back to the Jewish times and the German times when we were fighting World War. And I have a friend that had a good comment as Jews were being taken away and gassed and killed by the hundreds and by the thousands, that she didn't want to stand by and be a good German and allow that to happen. And I can't stand by and allow that to happen here too. Our Central American policies are very important. The bullets that we send down to Central America, specifically to El Salvador, are the ones that are causing these refugees to come up here. So it seems very clear to me that I'm exercising wisdom and compassion both.
Line 1, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Sandy, I would like to know, why are the immigration policies so changed from Second World War? I mean, at that time, the DPs, and I'm one from Estonia, had to flee from communist terror. We had to go through 20 years of waiting on a quota system. We had to produce health certificates, police certificates, and either a job or a bank account so we wouldn't be a burden on the country. And now all of a sudden, the floodgates are open, and we have to support all the illegal aliens.
All right, thanks for your question. I mean, this brings up another point. In World War II, a lot of Jews had to go to South America because they could not get into this country. They weren't able to get papers to come into this country for refuge.
Sandy, the caller just a moment ago made the point that immigration overall is out of control today. Legal immigration and illegal immigration are all out of control. And one of the objectives that we have is, if we have an immigration policy that is under control, then it is possible to deal with situations where you need to bring a group of people into this country in order to save their lives, and priority can be given to the true political refugees. But, you know, a house has a door so that you can open it and allow people to come in, and a country has a border that it controls so that the country, through its democratic institutions, can determine its immigration policy. And we can't have an immigration policy that is determined by the employers who want cheap labor, nor can we have an immigration policy that's determined by individuals who will choose to take the law into their own hands. If we do that and continue it, it will provoke a reaction from the American people that I fear could end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
We have to take this last time out. We'll be back right after these words. I want to thank my guest in Harlingen, Texas, Ms. Stacy Merkt. She was brought to trial for transporting an illegal alien from El Salvador, and most likely the verdict will be in on that case tomorrow. Thank you very much for being with us this evening, Ms. Merkt. And then let me come here to New York and thank Mr. Robert Connor. Mr. Connor is the Executive Director of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Thanks for joining us this evening. And once again, back to Harlingen, Texas, to thank Mr. Dan Sheehan. Mr. Sheehan is the attorney representing Stacey Merkt. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sandy.
And thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you on the next program. Good night.